everyone. Welcome to the Parts Girl podcast. I am super excited to be interviewing Glenn Harwood. Welcome, Glenn.
Morning, Kaylee. How are you?
I'm doing great. And you say morning and it is afternoon for me, so this is really fun.
Yeah,
Tell
well,
everyone where exactly you're located.
right now I'm in Brisbane, Australia, so on the east coast of Australia. But I actually spend most of my year living in Dubai. I'm originally from Australia, but I'm based out of Dubai.
Wow, yeah, that's wild because I mean, I've never been that far, so I can't even imagine what it's like. But we got connected through LinkedIn, mutual friends and colleagues, and you guys have an interesting product that you have had really success in Australia, and you guys are coming to the States here in 6 months to is that right? 6 months to a year?
Yeah, we're starting to soft launch before the end of the year, get some pilot dealers underway. But yeah, we make appraisal tools for car dealerships, and we've been doing that for 5 or 6 years. We've got about 1,500 car dealers in 14 different countries, mainly just through Australia, a little bit of Southeast Asia and the Middle East. Now we're looking to kick off in the States.
Awesome. And I want to get into exactly what you guys do because I feel like being in so many different countries, I feel like you guys have way more dynamic with data and interesting input that you can add to the states. And first of all, the name of the company is Algo Driven, so we'll put the link in there so everyone can hear or find it. But let's talk about appraisals and recon because that is all I hear on, all the used cars, everything. So tell me what is like what specific problem are you guys solving for the dealerships?
Yeah, what we're trying to do is just make the appraisal process faster, easier, and more accurate. And it's both for the dealer and the consumer because consumer behavior's changed so much in the last 5 or 6 years. Consumers want their car valued online, remotely. Essentially, we've just all they want to give is a few photos and the mileage of the car. Consumers don't want to drive to 4 different showrooms, have it inspected. And so our tool is helping enable dealerships to do those remote appraisals or in dealership appraisals and just honing in on the accuracy around reconditioning, around identifying the vehicle correctly, factory build options, all those different things that, for a 2 or 3 year old car really impacts the value.
Oh yeah, no. And I'm still really learning a lot about this as I listen to like I feel like my biggest resource is all things used cars on Fridays because they were just talking this morning about how they should, the appraisal process and kind of putting cars in different buckets. And a lot of the time my brain always goes to parts because that's where I live in because
Mhm.
used cars can very much translate into parts, the same terms.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you, when consumers are appraising their own vehicles, there's got to be concerns with that because they want the consumers to come to them, right? They want the customer to come. If they don't come in, isn't there a fear there that they're not going to come? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think traditionally, I remember when I was selling cars 7 or 8 years ago, of course, you wanted the consumer to come in. I mean, for two reasons. Of course, you can have a proper detailed look at the car, but also just statistically, if the consumer drove into the showroom, the chance of doing business with them was just so much higher. So, that was a big driver of that too. Whether the car really needed looking at or not, I think the primary reason was having the customer in the showroom. Having said that, I just think consumer behavior's changed so much and consumers just, they won't do that anymore. They're used to being able to buy everything online. And
That's
for a
true.
percentage of consumers, if the dealership can't facilitate the car sale, including the trade-in online, the consumer will just find another dealership who can.
Yeah, that's very valid. So what about the tool? Like, how does it work? So like, I'm a consumer. I want to sell my car. Like, how is it all connected?
Yeah, so the dealerships are our clients, and so it allows the dealership to embed our widget onto their website. They can generate unique links to send to consumers, and there's a mobile app to use in the shop as well. And essentially, the consumer enters their plate number, enters the mileage of the car, uploads some photos. That then completes the appraisal for the dealership. So it pulls all the factory build information. They've got the high resolution images of the car and it completes the appraisal from start to finish, gives them analytics on pricing, where that car sits in the market, as far as retail listings, book values, all of those things so that they can accurately price the car.
Wow, that's like very seamless.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's such a, as you sort of said before, it's such an important part of the transaction for dealers because if they get the trade in wrong, it can be the difference between making money and losing money on that whole transaction. There's a lot of money on the line.
Absolutely. There's a lot of money on the line. And then this, I feel like this would allow them to buy cars or things, buy cars that they may not normally think about. Because that was
Yeah,
one thing that I was hearing a lot in the clubhouse this morning was like, they're so historically they've been so reserved of like, oh, we don't sell that car very well. Whereas like you
exactly.
should be buying everything.
And I think a lot of that comes back to the confidence in the appraisal. If you're a Toyota dealer and you're buying and selling Toyota and Nissans and these sort of cars all day long, and then, an expensive Mercedes Benz rolls in that's four times the value of your average car, you don't want to make a mistake. So I think human nature is to be conservative on that, which means you probably don't trade it and you miss out on that sale. And so our product is really helping dealers solve that problem too by giving them the confidence to appraise a car that they don't see every day. If you're a Toyota dealer, you're probably great at valuing Toyotas and Nissans and Mitsubishis. But if something luxury rolls in, it can be quite scary because, the stakes are so much higher. So that's really part of the key problem we're trying to fix.
Yeah, that's a big deal. The confidence and really helping the salesperson have that confidence too is a big
And the
deal.
used car
Now you
manager as well.
and then yeah, use everyone really.
Because no one wants to lose their job by paying too much for a car. No one wants to do
Oh
that.
no,
So
no, they don't. Yeah, they're gonna feel it. And that was another thing too I heard was like a dealership that sells like a bunch of cars a year can the they can take a little bit of a risk or a little bit more of a risk, whereas like one that sell like 100 cars a year. I mean, I don't know that's not very much, so I'm assuming that's not very good. And so like the risks there, you have to be a lot more in line with your
precise.
appraisals, I think, right?
Yeah, the laws of averages, you can sort of wash some things out. If you're selling 100 or 200 cars a month and there's one or two that you got wrong, it probably doesn't matter. But if you're selling 10 cars a month, you got to get all 10 right. So, used cars can really be a volume game and volume can hide a lot of sins. But, getting it right every time, is going to increase profitability, whether you're a large or a small shop.
Oh yeah, it matters for both, and I think it would be helpful for a smaller or large volume store. You mentioned recons. So what problem are you guys solving in the recon process? Because there's a lot of pieces in that, and I hear lots of things. So tell me.
Oh, I mean, recon's so hard on used cars. I think, what we find is most of our clients, so we normally sell to the new car dealerships. So we find a lot of their trade-ins are 3 to 5 year old cars. So the typical recon we're seeing is things like scuffed rims, maybe a chipped windscreen, a few scratches and scuffs around the car. So that's that sort of
Not
recon
big
that's not
like maintenance stuff that needs like not stuff under the hood.
Not so much.
Okay.
Of course, that happens.
Yeah.
But, if the car's 3 to 5 years old, it might still be under warranty or just coming out of warranty. So a lot of the time, as long as the car starts and there's no engine lights on and it moves into gear, that's sort of the extent of the checks that a lot of the customer obviously drove the car there too. I mean, if they're in the showroom. So it must be a drivable car if they made it to the dealership. Of
Yeah.
course, doing things online, doesn't check that. So it tends to be more cosmetic. So our product helps the dealer identify all those issues. But the new thing we've got coming shortly is our damage AI feature, which will actually just do it all automatically, including pricing the damage. So it'll circle the scratched rims. The dealership can put in their labor rate. It knows that, it's going to take 2 hours to fix those scratched rims, and it will price it precisely based on that dealership's labor rate and the damage in the photos, which I think is going to be a real game changer.
That I think that's going to be a really big game changer because I think a lot of what I hear is like there's so much disconnect with sales and parts and service, and so sales will get a car in on trade and then they're like just fix it. Like who pays for what and all the disconnect of all of that. So it sounds like
Yeah,
you
and
solved
I've
it.
seen dealerships do different things over the years. I've seen some dealerships do like just a standard reconditioning amount. So they look at the last 12 months, how much they spend on reconditioning, and then they just do a standard amount, which takes away some of that. But then, I think that also doesn't work because, when they trade a 6 month old car, it's like, well, we don't want to pay the $2,500 standard reconditioning fee on this car because it's perfect and it's brand new. And then I think the parts and the service department feel upset when they get the 10-year-old car that gets a $10,000 bill in the workshop because they're like, the $2,000 average charge doesn't cover this one. So I think I've worked in dealerships where they've done that before, and I think it's good in theory, but doesn't quite work in reality.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the recon process is a big deal too, because I don't know if you guys help with like how quickly the recon happens, because I know that can be a disconnect too. Of like you get a car and then if you can't get it through the recon and get it out to sell, it's like that's a big deal. Time is money.
Yeah, I was just about to say exactly that, Kaylee. Time is money, especially for used cars, because every day it sits on the lot, it's depreciating. Or maybe it wasn't a couple of years ago with COVID, but I think we're back to they're depreciating again every day they sit on the lot. We're back to normality.
Yeah.
So, if it spends a week or two in the workshop, that can be $1,000 that it's dropped in value, and everyone loses, I think.
Oh
So
yeah.
speed is super important. Our product doesn't cover that side of things, but it's definitely on the roadmap for future on how we can help our customers optimize that part of the cycle because it is so important.
And I think there's some solutions out here in the States that do help with some of that process part of it. But that's exciting. So, and you mentioned before we got on, Steve Greenfield is one of your guys' investors. I can say that, right?
Yeah. Steve invested a couple of years ago from Automotive Ventures, and he's been a great support. He's such a font of knowledge, and he's been a real help to the business over the last few years since he's been on the journey with us.
That's so awesome. I interviewed him on the podcast, and he was probably like, he's such a great person, but he was the scariest interview because he's just so smart. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I hope I ask good questions. So that should help you guys too with coming to the States and doing like a soft launch and getting some dealers out there.
Yeah, for sure.
Um,
Yeah, it's been a huge value add having him and the whole Automotive Ventures team on board.
I bet. And so, tell me anything like that, or you're the co-founder. So I want to ask you like those deep questions of like, why? Like, why did you help co-found this company? Like, where did this all start?
You know what? I started it with my co-founder about 6 years ago, and I was working for Mercedes in Australia. About 12 years ago, I got offered a job for Mercedes-Benz in Abu Dhabi, and that took me to the Middle East. I did a few years in new cars at Mercedes in Abu Dhabi. I then got back to used cars again at BMW Dubai as the national used car manager. And when I was at BMW Dubai, I had a target of selling 2,000 used BMWs a year, which meant we had to buy 2,000
It's a lot.
used
Yeah.
BMWs a year. So we had like 4 purchasers whose job it would buy, who were KPI'd to buy those cars, 150 to 200 a month. And I remember I used to ask the 4 purchasers, how much is this BMW or this Mercedes, or how much is this Audi worth that we want to trade in? And the 4 purchasers would give me 5 different answers. And it was like, okay, fine. Explain why you think it's worth this much money. Why did one of you think it's worth $80,000 and the other one think it's worth $100,000? And honestly, the answers were things like, I love the smell and the color of this car. It's a really good car. Or it was like, my brother's cousin's sister sold a car like this 2 months ago and they got this for it, I heard, at a barbecue, so it must be worth the same. And I'm just like, what are we doing here? Like, how do we make money? And so that was really the motivation.
Yeah.
I built it for myself. I'm like, I want a tool that can help dealers value used cars, give them data and statistics, because everyone says used cars appraisal is a bit of art and science. And so I think in some of my previous jobs, it seemed like all art. I wanted to add the science back into the equation and give the dealers the data, the statistics and the tools to make more informed decisions, to sell more cars and to make more gross per unit.
Yeah, so I feel like the best solutions out there are the people that wanted it for themselves.
Yeah, that's it.
If you're doing it yourself, so you're like, why? There's a better way. We got to do this.
Yeah, exactly. I think, starting a startup's hard, so you need the motivation too. And, if you're solving your own problem, I think that helps you get started and keep you going through those first months and years where it can be really tough to get that initial traction.
Yeah. So talk about the startup part, because you guys are past the startup part essentially, right?
Yeah, we're about 30 people, so I don't know that we're necessarily a small startup anymore.
No. Yeah,
I
because
just
it's been
say,
like 6 years. But going back to that time, 'cause there's a lot of people, that start things and want to do things. What were your like main things that got you through? I'm sure there was days where you're like, why am I doing this? But I'm sure, like what got you through that?
Well, I think a few things happened early on. We were really lucky. We got venture capital investment right out of the gate. So we did a startup accelerator run by 500 startups and got investment straight away. And that really changed the dynamic early on because suddenly it's not your money and you're responsible to someone. Like you can't tell
Oh,
your investors that I was feeling a bit down and spent the day, sleeping in bed. Like, whereas if you're not responsible to anyone, like you can do that. So I
that's a
think
good point.
that
That
made
helps
it like
motivate.
real straight away.
Yeah.
Um,
And how did you guys get that so early on? Was there like a process or just like, was it just luck or you just knew people?
Look, I think it's a little bit of all of that. I had a friend who'd done the 500 startups accelerator, and he's like, "Glenn, you've got to do this. They taught me this and this and this. It was the best experience. It really made it real for me. Like you should apply." So we applied, went through the interview process, and got accepted. So it was really, yeah. As I said, I was having lunch with a friend, and he was the one who said, "Glenn, you got to do it," and pushed me to do it. And it definitely changed the trajectory of the company right from the start.
I bet. Yeah, that's huge. And then just kind of like set you guys off because then once you have that, I bet it too helped with that confidence. You're like, I'm doing the right thing and getting like, people see the value in it. So, this has got to work.
Yeah, and you're always chasing the next milestone as well. You've got to give investor reports, and it's like, okay, so now we've done an accelerator round. We want to do a pre-seed round, a seed round, a Series A. So it
Hmm.
sort of sets you on that path where you've got goals and milestones to achieve. So it gives you a lot more momentum, and as I said, a lot of responsibility too, which changes things and a bit more pressure. I think a level of stress helps with anything.
It
So
does.
it sort of gives you that level of stress and motivation and pressure to make it real and try and get it to the next level.
That makes sense. Without goals, you're just kind of doing nothing really.
Yeah, that's it.
There's, I mean, you're not really improving without goals, I think.
Yeah, that's it. So I think that was, looking back on our journey, that was of course, getting the first 10 customers was super hard, and we used our professional network and those sort of things. But as I said, on those hard days, if we weren't responsible for someone else's money, maybe we would have given up or spent a day laying in bed when you're
Yeah.
having to give weekly progress reports. You just can't do that.
No, you can't. Is there anything else in like your day-to-day life that helps you stay grounded or stay motivated other than being responsible for other people? Well, back then, but yeah.
I mean, of course, I love what I do. I find it really enjoyable. I love speaking to our customers, spending time in dealerships, seeing, hearing what the current challenges are on the showroom floor, seeing how they're solving them. I love seeing what's happening in the industry as far as, new cars, how people are adopting technology and AI. I think that's so interesting in the automotive space. Because I think for years, automotive's been a little bit slow on technology adoption. And I think, 10 years ago, automotive tech wasn't where the action's at. And suddenly you've got self-driving cars, you've got AI in dealerships, you've got new retail models with agency models and direct to consumer. In the last 5 or 6 years, there's just been so much action in the space. And that certainly is exciting to see.
It's very exciting because I've been in the industry about 10 years now. And I think the last 5 years, really the last 5 years, because it's, gosh, time's flying by. Just the amount of people that are focused on the parts department and fixed ops is like crazy how much it's shifted. It's a big deal. It's very exciting.
Yeah, I think parts is a really exciting part of the business. And especially, we speak to some of our customers who've moved to agency models and they're like, well, there's not much excitement in new cars anymore. It's fixed pricing. So all the excitement's in used cars and in parts and that sort of thing. So the focus is shifting in dealerships as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. It is more exciting because you have to be really strategic about the way that you do business and have everything set up. One thing you mentioned though, you mentioned AI. So I want to spend a couple minutes on that because I feel like that's something. I feel like we should call it something else because then I feel like if you use AI, people are like, here we go. But I want to hear like your experience or things that you're seeing where you are and the dealerships you're working with AI and how it's helping. Because okay, the first thing I want to say is I don't think AI is to replace anyone or do it. I think it helps us do our jobs faster and be more efficient.
Yeah.
So I think it's a tool. We got to use
Right.
it. So how are you guys seeing that getting used a lot?
I mean, I think the two things that we're seeing a lot in dealerships is these AI chatbots around helping customers in the purchase, whether it's purchasing a new car, doing a service booking, taking a general inquiry. I think AI chatbots on dealer websites has been one of those early things that's fallen into place and it's got a high degree of adoption. I think
Yeah.
the other thing we're seeing a lot of is around car inspections. So, these AI car scanners using computer vision to scan cars that are going in
Yeah.
and out of the service lane. I think they're the two things that we're seeing a lot of activity on. They're definitely the two that pop to mind that, a lot of dealerships have either implemented or they're talking about.
And your technology has AI in it, right? Like it's not solely AI, but it utilizes that technology to be able to capture those pictures or take those pictures and transcribe it into what it needs to be, right?
Yeah, so we've been using machine learning, which is a subset of AI for years now in our product around used car pricing. We rewrote and relaunched that in the last 12 months. So we've relaunched a pricing AI service using more sophisticated AI tools to price the car. And then, as I was saying earlier, we've got damage AI coming out in the next month or two, which will do the image transcribing and the reconditioning from the images. I think that's a real game changer for customers buying a car online because it really means they can just upload 10 photos of their trade-in, enter the mileage, and the dealership knows not only everything about the car, but everything about the car and its condition, which has always been a bit of the missing element.
Yeah, that's the missing piece. And that solves the piece of like, you have to come in for us to appraise it. And then I would imagine like having that in place gives it a solid structure of like, we're not having to be like, well, my friend's sister said they sold this car for this much. It's just like, it's all data and it's all like, this is what the market, is it like the market or yeah, like this is what the market is selling this vehicle for. These are the damages and this is how much it's going to cost to fix the damages.
Yeah, and this is where it sits in the market. So when we look at data, we use a lot of machine learning. We look at both the dealership's historical data and the market because, some dealers sell certain cars for more or less of the market. A BMW dealer might be really good at selling used BMWs and not very good at selling used Toyotas. So we analyze both the dealership's historical appraisals, their current inventory, and their historical sales records. We overlay that in the market. So this is what the market's doing. This is the dealership's strengths and weaknesses. And then the last piece is what's unique about this car. Does it have extra options? Does it have more damage? And so, laying those three pieces of the puzzle together.
And does it pick up all the like extra little things like unless the consumer would put that in like I added this special thing to it or does like the picture taking a picture of it pick that up like oh we noticed you added I don't know something cool like a roof rack to your I mean that's an easy one to spot but
Yeah, so one of the features that we launched with when we launched the product was factory options and VIN specific options. And that's been a real driver of our product growth since day one, because you're exactly right. There's things like air suspension, upgraded sound systems that you can barely, they're hard to see even if you're looking at the car. And
and I will say people like like me if I added stuff to my vehicle I'm like proud of that I'm like I did this you should pay me more for it
for
but go
sure,
ahead.
so our system does highlight all the factory options of the car. So if it's been specially ordered with air suspension, upgraded sound system, those sort of things, it highlights those and takes that into account in valuing the car.
That's really cool. I like that. So, what are some things that you, besides doing your guys' soft launch this year, what are some things that you guys are you're excited about? Are you going to any conferences? Like, how are you getting your foot in with the state's network?
Yeah, so we're still finalizing the go-to-market plan, but we have been over or visiting a lot of conferences the last year or two. We've been to NADA, always love that one. We're at Used Car Week in Arizona last year. So been
Oh,
spending
good.
more and more time there, just really learning about the market, speaking to dealers, speaking to other people in the industry. So really just trying to understand more of that market. And you know what? We're already in 14 different markets, and all 14 markets that we're in now are a little bit different. And I'm sure the States is no different. There's some similarities and there's some differences. So we're working on that, trying to make sure that we have a really solid understanding. and then sort of finalizing our go-to market strategy over the next 6 months and getting ready to kick off.
Yay, that's so exciting. I can't wait to see more about it and check in 6 months to see how it's going. And
Yeah,
you're
love
so
to hear
right.
more.
Just being in, like I said before, being in so many different countries, it's like there's similarities, there's differences, but you guys are spending the time to understand the differences and, networking to, the other thing I said too, it gives you that other like outsider perspective. Like you're outside of it. You know how when you're in it, you're like, don't see it all, the big picture, I think
Yeah.
sometimes. So,
And there's good that all car dealers do things differently. So the more car dealers you speak to, the more interesting ideas you get, the more great, good and bad ideas. And so I think for us, it's trying to pick up the great things we hear all the way across our customer base and how we can implement those in our product and sort of drive a little bit of change as well. If we can help a car dealership be more efficient by tweaking their process or using our software slightly differently, we want to take an idea that we see in one market and implement it in others.
oh yeah, that gives you like the advantage of like, implementing other ideas and helping other dealerships all over the countries, all the
Yeah,
different
we want
countries.
to we want to be an innovator in our product. We want to
Yeah,
drive the industry forward. We want to be moving forward with new ideas. We don't want to be slow and reactive. So I think being in more markets helps us do that.
yes, definitely. Okay, so I want to ask like a harder question, and maybe you have experienced this, but because you are a co-founder of the company, when someone has, I'm sure you've gotten no's before, maybe.
Sorry.
When you're talking, I'm sure you've gotten no's before, like when you're
Yeah.
presenting, you're talking. So, as a co-founder, how do you handle that? Because it's definitely like someone's calling your baby ugly when they tell you no, they don't understand or they don't want it or whatever. How do you handle that?
Well, I guess, my background was in car sales before this. So
Oh, I guess that's easier.
any car salesman knows you also get a lot of no's selling cars. So I think, of course, when it's your baby, there's more attachment to it, as you say. And you know what? We try and build relationships with car dealerships. So even if it's no, it might be no right now.
No, yeah,
Yeah, the way they do business can change. Our product changes. Maybe people move around dealerships
the
too.
time.
They might see our product in another dealership. So look, we understand that it's part of life sometimes getting a no, but we want to keep that relationship there, stay close to the dealer, and when things change in the future, we're still there and ready if things come around.
Absolutely. And it's never really a no, right? It's just a not right now. Unless
Yeah.
they're really like they're not even I feel like the no's are the people that you probably don't even really want to work with because they're not even taking that time to really like see the opportunity where it's like it's a no for not or it's a not right now.
Yeah,
'Cause
and you
it's
know what?
not
Being in business now for a little while, some of those no's from 3 or 4 years ago have come back around as yeses.
yeah,
The market's changed, the dealerships changed, and I think just there's something to be said for just being in business for a while. Some of those people from 3 years ago just come back, and just because you're in the game, it certainly helps.
they're like you're not going away. Okay.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
got
And
to
and
figure
I
it
think
out.
that's a bit of it too. Like, oh,
Yeah.
you guys are new. Let's see how you're going in 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, absolutely. But now that you've been in it for a while, they're like, okay, you got something good. Other people are using it. And yeah, that's a big deal. I always like asking that question to founders or co-founders because I know that was something with PartsEdge. One of the founders, it's hard when people tell you no. And it's like, you're the one that was like in the weeds creating it. And so I was like asking that question. So to wrap up, is there anything that you want to add to the listeners? I mean, I don't think that I have a huge following, but I do have some people that listen to this, I think. So is there anything you want to say or
No, just we're really excited to be kicking off in the States later this year. If there's anyone listening who wants to learn more about our product, feel free to reach out to me directly or visit our website, which is algodriven.xyz. I'm sure the link will be in the show notes.
yes,
We're obviously looking for pilot dealers, so if it sounds like something that you want to try and sounds exciting, certainly get in touch, and we'd love to have you on board.
yeah, that's good. Okay. And we'll definitely put the link so that people can find you if they want to be pilot dealers. So yeah, I'm really excited to catch up again in 6 months and see how things are going.
For sure, we'd love to fill you in on our journey.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kaylee. See you later.
Thank you for joining us. PartsEdge, the power tool for your parts department. We hope you're leaving feeling motivated, challenged, and inspired.